The second category of lipids that are biologically relevant that we're going to talk about are phospholipids. Before we go into these, because phospholipids are a close cousin to our fats, let's review what a fat looks like. So let me see if I can sketch one out for you. Right? So remember, the fat is going to have two main components, right? You're going to have your glycerol, abbreviate like that. That's our glycerol with a nice little G there. And attached to our glycerol, we're going to have those three fatty acids. Now remember, they can be different lengths, saturated, unsaturated, you name it. Now if we take a look at a phospholipid, phospholipids are very similar, except in place of one of the fatty acids, you add a different component attached to that same hydroxyl group within a glycerol. So if I were to take and let's say erase this particular fatty acid, redraw my glycerol there, now I'll be left with two fatty acids, and using that hydroxyl group over here, I'm going to add actually a phosphate group. Remember the phosphate groups? I'm going to add a phosphate group to the head of the glycerol here. And so what we end up with is essentially two different ends of the molecule. This part of the molecule here in red with your hydrophobic fatty acids, that part is going to be hydrophobic. And then if we pick a different color, this portion of the phospholipid is actually going to be hydrophilic with a lot of oxygens within the chemical structure there. So this creates a molecule that is going to be what we call amphipathic. Right, amphipathic. It has two different parts. One side of it is hydrophilic and the other side is going to be hydrophobic. Right, so in a phospholipid, we actually have three parts instead of just the two that we had for a fat. In a phospholipid, we still have the glycerol, right? Glycerol. We still have two of the three fatty acids, but in place of the third fatty acid, we have this phosphate group. Remember, the two fatty acid tails are hydrophobic, but the phosphate group and its attachment to the glycerol forms that sort of hydrophilic head for those phospholipids. So if we're going to take a look at a picture that is prettier than the one that I drew, so as we look at the structure of the phospholipid, right, we're going to have, right, a couple ways of looking at it. Here's the structural formula. There's a little space filling model, and here's sort of the abbreviated version that your book uses to sort of get the point across without actually looking at the actual chemical structure. So if we take a look at the structural formula, this portion right here, you'll notice three of those carbons right there, right, and this is where all three hydroxyl groups were. Two of them were used to attach these two fatty acids, and then the last one over here was used to attach to a phosphate group. Right, now it's one of the different components that phospholipids have that the fats don't. On top of that, this particular phospholipid has an extra decoration. This is a choline component. It's not nearly as important as the phosphate group itself, which is bound to the glycerol. So this whole portion here that's highlighted in gray, you'll notice has a lot of oxygens, right? Oxygens are very electronegative. You're going to have some charged pockets there, something to attract water molecules to. So we call that the hydrophilic head. Now down here below are going to be the hydrophobic or primarily hydrocarbon tails of the fatty acids, and that's going to be the hydrophobic component of the phospholipid. So again, if we take a look at our little phospholipid symbol here, the gray is the hydrophilic head, likes to be with water, and the bottom portion here are the two hydrophobic tails that are afraid of water and don't want anything to do with it. Okay, the interesting thing about these phospholipids is if you were to take a handful of them and you throw them into water, based on their amphipathic nature, they're going to self-assemble themselves into this double layered structure that's called a lipid bilayer, and you can see an image of it right here. So the phospholipids are all sort of arranged into two layers, and the way they arrange themselves is that they point their hydrophilic heads out towards the aqueous solution, either on the top or on the bottom there where the blue is, and then they shelter all of their hydrophobic fatty acid tails in the center of that phospholipid bilayer. And this general structure, this phospholipid bilayer, is really the basic component to any cellular membrane, whether it's the actual cell membrane or an organelle membrane. This is the basic structure. And so really the existence of cells depends on phospholipids. If we didn't have phospholipids that could form this bilayer and to form sort of this boundary between two aqueous solutions, the inside of the cell and the outside, cells wouldn't exist as we know them today. All right, and then our last category of fats are going to be our steroids. Now steroids, they look absolutely nothing like fats or like phospholipids, and they're actually characterized by a carbon skeleton that consists of 4 fused rings, much like what you see down here. So 3 of the rings are going to be 6-membered rings, and one of them over here on the right-hand side is a 5-membered ring. What you see down below, that's cholesterol. So cholesterol is a type of steroid lipid, and it's also an important component of many animal cell membranes. It is also a sort of precursor for other steroid-based molecules like estradiol and testosterone. Cholesterol, being a steroid, is also important to discuss when it comes to nutrition, right? You still need a certain amount of cholesterol in your diet. Your body can also produce its own cholesterol as well. But if you consume too much cholesterol in your diet, this can also help lead to cardiovascular disease. So again, moderation is key in this case as well.